The question hit Catherine Miller like a knife through her heart. Standing at the Family Feud podium in her simple blue cardigan, the one her mother had knitted 3 years ago, she felt the weight of 18 months of watching the woman who raised her disappear piece by piece. Every shared memory now felt like evidence of a person who no longer existed. "What hurts most?" Steve Harvey had asked. Those 3 words opened a wound that had been bleeding for over a year. Catherine wondered if love could survive when the person who taught you how to love no longer remembers your name. It was Friday afternoon, at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. The Miller family had driven 4 hours from Asheville, North Carolina, hoping this trip might create one last happy memory before it was too late. Catherine had planned this visit during one of her mother's good days, though those were becoming increasingly rare. Catherine Miller, 52, looked like someone carrying invisible weight. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held the exhaustion that comes from months of sleepless nights and heartbreaking days. She'd been her mother's primary caregiver since the diagnosis, watching the brilliant woman who'd been a college professor slowly fade into confusion and fear. Margaret Miller, 74, sat in the audience with a care aide. Her silver hair was neatly styled, and she wore the purple dress Catherine had chosen because it used to be her favorite color. But Margaret's blue eyes held the distant look of someone who was physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely, somewhere her daughter couldn't follow. What the audience didn't know was that Margaret no longer recognized Catherine as her daughter. On good days, she might think Catherine was a nice nurse or a family friend. On bad days, she would ask when her real daughter was coming to visit, breaking Catherine's heart into smaller and smaller pieces each time. During family introductions, Steve had been gentle with Margaret. He'd noticed the way she looked around the studio with childlike wonder, how she seemed confused but not distressed. Catherine had explained quietly that her mother had Alzheimer's, and this might be their last family outing together. "Catherine," Steve had said during the opening segment, "tell me about your mom. She seems like a sweet lady." Catherine had smiled, fighting back tears. "She's the strongest woman I know. She raised me by herself after my father died, worked 2 jobs to put me through college." "She sounds amazing," Steve had replied, watching Margaret wave enthusiastically at the cameras like a child. "How is she doing now?" Catherine's voice had cracked slightly when she answered. "She's fighting a battle she can't win, but she's still fighting." The game had progressed through 4 rounds, with Catherine carrying most of the load for her family team. Margaret had tried to participate when called upon, but her answers were often confused or from decades past. The other family members, Catherine's aunt and cousins, had rallied around both women, understanding that this wasn't really about winning money. Catherine had been caring for Margaret for 18 months now. Every morning brought new evidence of her mother's decline. Forgotten names, repeated questions, moments of terror when familiar faces became threatening strangers. The hardest part wasn't the physical care or the sleepless nights. It was watching the woman who'd been her best friend for 30 years become someone who looked at her with polite confusion. Now, in the final round, with everything on the line, Steve was asking the question that would force Catherine to confront the cruelest aspect of this disease. She would have to speak aloud the thing that was breaking her heart in real time, every single day. "Catherine," Steve said gently, "we need 44 points to win this thing. What hurts most?" The studio buzzed with familiar energy. The Miller family needed this answer to secure victory and take home money that could help with Margaret's increasing medical costs. This should have been manageable territory for Catherine. Most people would say losing loved ones, watching children struggle, or seeing injustice in the world. Universal experiences of pain that everyone could relate to without revealing anything too devastating. But Catherine stood frozen at that podium, her mind on the morning routine that had become a daily heartbreak. Every day she would walk into her mother's room with hope that today might be different. Every day, Margaret would look at her with polite confusion and ask, "Excuse me, dear, but when is my daughter coming to visit?" "Catherine?" Steve prompted gently, stepping closer to the podium. He could see the tears forming in her eyes, could sense that his question had touched something unbearably painful. The studio fell quiet as everyone waited for her answer. Catherine looked across the stage at her mother in the audience. Margaret was smiling and waving at the cameras, completely unaware that her daughter was struggling on stage. In Margaret's mind, Catherine was just another kind stranger. Not the baby she'd rocked to sleep for years. Not the little girl she'd taught to read. Not the woman she'd walked down the aisle just 5 years ago. "My mom doesn't know I'm her daughter," Catherine said. Her voice broke on the word daughter, as if speaking it aloud made the loss feel fresh all over again. The confession hung in the studio air, like a prayer for mercy that would never come. The studio fell into complete silence. This wasn't the polite quiet of game show suspense. This was the profound hush that emerges when 300 strangers suddenly understand they're witnessing one of life's cruelest realities, the death of someone who's still alive. Steve's expression changed immediately, his game show demeanor dissolving into something raw and human. In 40 years of hosting, he'd heard thousands of answers to thousands of questions, but something about the way Catherine said "my mom doesn't know I'm her daughter," with such devastating acceptance, such quiet devastation, cut through every professional barrier he'd built around his emotion. "Tell me about that," Steve said, abandoning his position and walking closer to Catherine. The game could wait. The points could wait. This moment was about something infinitely more important than any prize they could offer. Catherine wiped her eyes and looked toward her mother. Margaret was still smiling and waving, living in her own world, where daughters were concepts rather than the person standing 20 feet away. "She asks me every day when her daughter is coming to visit," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger through the pain. The audience was completely still, hanging on every word. "I show her pictures of us together, my wedding, holidays, birthdays. She looks at them like she's seeing strangers. Sometimes she gets angry and tells me to stop pretending to be her daughter." Steve found himself fighting back tears. This wasn't just about memory loss. This was about the fundamental relationship between mother and child being erased by a disease that showed no mercy. "How long has this been going on?" 18 months. Catherine replied. "The doctors said it would get worse before it got better. But it never got better. It just kept getting worse, until one day she looked at me and asked who I was." Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that would define this moment forever. Steve Harvey had built his career on bringing joy to families, on creating moments of connection and celebration. But standing there, looking at a daughter whose mother could no longer recognize her, he found himself in territory where laughter felt inappropriate and easy answers seemed cruel. "Catherine," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to listen to me. Your mother may not remember that you're her daughter, but her heart knows. Love doesn't live in memory, it lives in something deeper than that." Catherine looked up at him with eyes that held 18 months of rejection from the person she loved most. "But she doesn't know me, Steve. The woman who raised me, who was my best friend, who knew everything about me, she's gone. I'm grieving someone who's sitting 20 feet away from me." "No," Steve said firmly, kneeling down so they were eye level. "She's not gone. She's different, but she's not gone. The love she gave you for 52 years, that's still inside you, that's still real, that's still yours to keep forever." The studio was electric with emotion. This wasn't a game show anymore. This was one human being trying to help another carry a burden that threatened to crush her spirit entirely. "You know what I think?" Steve continued, turning to look at Margaret in the audience. "I think somewhere deep inside, she knows she's safe, because you're there. I think her heart recognizes you even when her mind doesn't." Without consulting producers, Steve did something unprecedented. He gestured for Margaret's care aide to help bring her onto the stage. "Mrs. Margaret, would you like to come up here with us?" Margaret's face lit up with delight as she was helped onto the stage. She looked around with wonder, clearly enjoying the attention but not understanding why she was there. When she saw Catherine, she smiled politely and said, "Hello, dear. Are you part of the show too?" The audience held its breath as Catherine's face crumpled. Here was her mother, the woman who'd given her life meaning, talking to her like a stranger at a bus stop. "Yes, ma'am," Catherine managed to say through her tears. "That's nice," Margaret said sweetly. "You seem like such a lovely girl. You remind me of my daughter. She's supposed to visit me today, but she's running late." Steve stepped forward, understanding that this moment required something beyond television. "Mrs. Margaret," he said gently, "what can you tell me about your daughter?" Margaret's face glowed with pride. "Oh, she's wonderful. She's smart and kind and beautiful. She takes such good care of everyone around her. I'm so proud of the woman she became." Steve looked at Catherine, who was crying but also smiling for the first time. "She sounds amazing. What's her name?" "Catherine," Margaret said without hesitation. "Catherine Marie Miller. She's my whole world." The studio erupted in spontaneous applause as everyone realized what had just happened. Margaret might not recognize Catherine's face, but somewhere deep in her heart, she knew exactly who her daughter was and how much she loved her. Steve turned to Catherine with tears streaming down his face. "Did you hear that? She knows exactly who you are. She knows you're smart and kind and beautiful. She knows you take care of everyone. She knows you're her whole world." Catherine was sobbing now, but they were different tears. For 18 months, she'd felt like she'd lost her mother completely. But in this moment, she understood that love doesn't require recognition. It transcends it. "Mrs. Margaret," Steve said, "I want you to meet someone very special. This is Catherine. She's been taking such good care of you." Margaret looked at Catherine again, and for just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. "Catherine," she said softly. "My Catherine." "Yes, Mom," Catherine whispered. "I'm right here." Margaret reached out and touched Catherine's face with trembling hands. "You're so beautiful, baby. Have you been crying? Don't cry. Mommy's here." The moment lasted only seconds before Margaret's confusion returned. But Catherine had heard what she needed to hear, that somewhere inside the disease, her mother was still there, still loving her, still being proud of the woman she'd raised. As the cameras finally stopped rolling, something beautiful continued to unfold. Families in the audience approached Catherine with their own stories of Alzheimer's, of watching parents fade, of the guilt and grief that comes with caring for someone who no longer knows you. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came from Margaret herself. As they were preparing to leave, she looked at Catherine and said quietly, "You have such kind eyes, dear. You must be someone very special." "I try to be," Catherine replied, helping her mother with her coat. "I bet your mother is very proud of you," Margaret said. Catherine smiled through her tears. "I hope so." 6 months later, the episode aired exactly as it happened. The response was unlike anything in game show history. Thousands of families dealing with Alzheimer's reached out to share their own stories of love, loss, and the journey of caring for someone whose mind was slipping away. Catherine's moment sparked conversations about Alzheimer's, about the emotional toll on caregivers, about the importance of recognizing that love exists beyond memory. Support groups across the country reported increased attendance as families realized they weren't alone in their struggles. Steve's foundation partnered with Alzheimer's organizations to create programs specifically designed to help families navigate the emotional challenges of the disease. The Love Beyond Memory initiative provided counseling and support for caregivers who were grieving the loss of someone still physically present. But the most important change happened in Catherine's own heart. She learned to treasure the moments when Margaret seemed happy and peaceful, rather than mourning the moments of confusion. She discovered that being her mother's daughter wasn't about being recognized. It was about continuing to love unconditionally. Catherine still cares for Margaret, who continues to decline. Some days are harder than others, but Catherine now understands that every day she gets to love her mother is a gift, even if that love isn't returned in the traditional way. The question that broke Catherine's heart, what hurts most, became the question that helped her heal. Because sometimes the most painful truths lead us to the most profound realizations about what love really means. The Alzheimer daughter's goodbye wasn't really a goodbye at all. It was an understanding that love doesn't end when memory fails. It transforms into something deeper, something that exists beyond recognition, beyond recall, beyond everything except the eternal bond between a mother and the daughter she raised to be kind, smart, and beautiful. And in Margaret's heart, Catherine would always be her whole world, whether she remembered it or not.